Did you know that we need action-oriented education to improve the opportunities that children and young adults need to succeed in school, home, and life? Welcome to EDUCA K16 Podcast. We started a conversation on Latinos in education with my distinguished co-host and expert, Dr. Abdin Novoa Rios, who has written two books, The Story of Latinos in Education in American History, and the latest book, Critical Issues of Latinos and Education in 21st Century America. Where are we? You can hear and see more of our interviews from the prominent educators that Dr. Novoa interviewed for his research on America's educational challenges. Just visit domasgroup.com or subscribe at EDUCA K16 Podcast on YouTube channel or on any of the podcast channels. Welcome, Dr. Novoa.
Good to be here once again.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we are excited to introduce our new guest. Please, can you please introduce us to Mr. Pedro Pedraza?
I will surely try. It's a tremendous opportunity to have Dr. Pedro Pedraza with us. He recently became retired, but more than after like 40 plus years of being in education in various ways. We are excited about his being on the podcast, as we have talked to several of his colleagues in the past as part of our series, and now we have the real McCoy with us. Just a brief background, Pedro has been very much associated with El Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños at CUNY Hunter College. Some time back ago with the well-known, now deceased, professor, personality, Frank Bonilla, where he worked as his right-hand person for a good number of years there. Pedro has also been a very key leader in NLERAP, and we heard about NLERAP through our interview with Angela Valenzuela and in our conversations with Tony Baez. But Pedro goes even beyond from the very beginning of the process, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. In addition, Pedro recently, several years ago, from the American Educational Research Association, AERA, received the Distinguished Award in the name and in the honor of Paulo Freire, as one of the Freirean pioneers in the country. And I can continue with the accolades, but all of that to say that he's a very special person that we're honored to have today, and a very dear friend. And so, Pedro, welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. It's finally happening too. We've been only talking about we've only been talking about it for 6 months, right? So I was
and you are originally from New York for a good number of years, and from East Harlem, and then now in St. Petersburg, Florida, collecting sun.
Turning sunlight into vitamin D, which I recently understood goes to your brain and increases your endorphins, so you're happy.
So there you go.
We all need to move there.
I was in New York recently for a friend of mine, a photographer, was opening up in a new exhibit at MoMA, and so I went there to support him, and I was there a week, and I got 1 day of sunshine in that whole week. I wanted to get the hell out of there as soon as I could.
I should also have mentioned in the introduction, but the introduction can go on, but you also have been a board member of one of the special museums out of New York.
Yeah, El
Museo del Barrio.
Yes. Well, you want me to start talking about the Centro and Frank at the beginning?
Well, let me try to sound there for a second. Okay. Sandra?
Yeah, thank you. Just before we start, just shout out to Jose Carlos from Vottles for our post production and DTO for our jingle that you heard at the beginning. Thank you so much. Without you, I don't know what we would do. But welcome, Pedro. And before you start, Pedro, can you just tell us, because in the introduction, Abdeen mentioned that you had worked as a researcher with um, NLRAP,
NLERAP.
NLERAP. Can you just tell us what that acronym is for our viewers, for our audience?
National Latino Education Research Agenda Project, and that
Excellent.
really initiatives came out of IUPLR, which is another initiative that started off with originally five Latino research centers across the country, and now it's over 20. I think it's about approaching 27 or 28 Latino research centers. And NLRAP was basically a social science group of scholars who were doing economic, political, historical research. When the issue of education always came up, and we didn't have any education task force, so to speak, a group. And so it was out of the need for that, because to respond to what many of the studies were constantly showing, no matter what, how important education was for our community and how it has really failed us, the system. Abdeen, of course, talks a lot about that, and it was an effort at basically, I would say, self-determination, in the sense, let's take the research agenda into our own hands instead of depending upon foundations and government and whoever wants to donate, and decide for ourselves what research we need to do to improve the situation. So that
Thank
and
you
that
for
came
that.
and that
Thank
was
you for
in
that. We're going to go deeper into that. Sorry to cut you, Pedro. We're going to go deeper into that. I don't want Abdeen to get upset at me at the order of questions, but I know that for our listeners, if they want to go deeper before our other podcast on with Angela Valenzuela, she also spoke about it a bit. So,
right.
but Abdeen, please take it away. Let's start the interview.
All right. In terms of the first question, Pedro, as a backdrop, you have been a valuable critic of traditional education. And then years ago, you had the opportunity to work closely with Dr. Frank Bonilla, as I had mentioned, and he was a vanguard leader in education, a professor at Harvard, then at Stanford, then CUNY Hunter College, where he was the founding director of the Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños, Puerto Rican Studies Center at Hunter College. And you work closely with him at the Centro.
Yes.
Now, given today's controversy about ethnic studies, CRT, and everything else involved in those labels, what are your reflections on the importance of such a center today, especially given the controversy surrounding this topic? How would you respond?
I think that it's the importance of the center is not any less than it was 40 years, 40 some, almost 20. Actually, it's going on 50 years now. 50 years ago when we first started the Centro. The Centro came out of an initiative that was actually from the community, from scholars and students, etc., to create knowledge about the Puerto Rican experience in the United States. And that emerged out of the creation of Puerto Rican studies departments within CUNY, which is a result of open admissions, which allowed for the first time many Puerto Rican students and African American students for the first time into CUNY, and they discovered no curriculum that reflected their reality and their history, and so the demand for that. And in developing those programs, there was very much a need for the history already almost 100 years of Puerto Rico in the United States, and that's what the Centro comes out of. And I think that effort to develop our own narrative about our experience and our history is the essence of what this critical race theory stuff is a issue is about. I think it's a power struggle of who's going to control the narrative, basically, that comes out of political, economic, historical, social, cultural imperatives for control. And I think that for the longest, since the beginning, there's been in this country a lack of recognition of we've always been a multicultural, multilingual society right from the beginning, and they almost actually don't want to acknowledge that in their narrative. And if you try to put that into the narrative, that's where you get the pushback. And I think we're getting, because the numbers are getting to the point where the narrative that they're pushing is going to be obsolete because they will then be the minority in the country. And I think that can be awkward, right, for them. And I think that there's many ways to respond to that. One is through our own research and our own academic work, our own education. I think NLERAP effort to take over some of the role of the training of the teachers, and we had that initiative. I guess Angela spoke about it, the Grow Your Own, where we actually control the training of our teachers, so that not only in curriculum but in pedagogy, they are trained to really be effective with our students. And we have examples of schools around the country that know how to do that. And we got to learn from them. But I think it's just as important now as ever. Is, I guess, the bottom line.
And thank you for that. Actually, it sounds like it may be even more important now than ever.
Yeah.
Precisely because of the controversy, which does not assume that everything is even keeled as yet. There are still many gaps that have to be filled, and if anything, with the disinformation taking place, right, you would think we would need to know more about our past.
No, exactly, right. And our young people, especially, because I always become aware of, and people make me aware of a lot of what our young people don't know about, even our recent, well, for me, recent history, because it's in my lifetime, and that to me means recent, that they don't understand and they don't know, and where are they going to get that information? Where are they going to get that understanding? And that's where we need to engage in that controversy in a way that it contributes to the narrative being one that's accurate. I wouldn't say apolitical, because it's always going to be political, but as I said, more inclusive, I would say, in terms of the viewpoints. And I'm not saying that we have the sole angle on the truth, and we know what the truth is. I think, of course, history, as you know, is always a work in progress, and we should see it that way. But it's a more acutely a political struggle than it was when we started the Center 50 years ago, which is right in the middle of the civil rights movement, where everybody was trying to change things to get more equality. Now we're in a position where everybody's, well, not everybody, but many people are trying to recreate inequality. And we have to, the way to defend ourselves is by knowing better our own history.
And also, if I may add, that creating this narrative opportunity, I mean, narratives can live simultaneously, side by side, because we're so many diverse groups of people living side by side, right? But for the young adults and children, the social emotional well-being that comes out of this is huge. Not just their educational success, but their whole, right? It's a holistic approach of looking at it. So this is wonderful work. Yeah, moving into the next question, and you started talking about NLERAP, NLRAP. You worked with a team of researchers from CUNY, right? And who are now in Texas, Austin, University of Texas, which we mentioned earlier, Angela Valenzuela. You've also been the board member, you mentioned, of El Museo del Barrio in New York City, among a lot of other initiatives. Can you tell us a little bit about these initiatives and go a little bit deeper, the importance of it as a reflection for today?
Okay. Well, I wasn't with a team of researchers at CUNY. I was at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, and participating in IUPLR. Abdin knows more about IUPLR. He understands, but a lot of people don't even know about IUPLR. But it's like I was saying, it's a consortium of different Latino academic researchers around the country, and working with people from other universities who work in education, who are members of those centers, coming together and talking about education. And I once had an experience where I was in the West Coast at a NACS conference, the National Association of Chicana Studies, and I would go to sessions where colleagues from these universities would talk about education issues, and then colleagues from those universities talking about history and political science, economics, and there's no connection. And so I was like, why are not we talking to each other so that we can reinforce what we're doing in our work and really not let the bureaucratic divisions of the university determine for us our future, so that we don't talk to each other. We should be breaking that and working together. And so I actually had colleagues from the same university doing great work who don't talk to each other. But if they did, it would be so much more powerful for education and our work in education. And so that's one of the reasons for NLERAP is to bring together all these people, as well as just the issue of doing research that we define and we initiate rather than outside of the community.
And
So,
when you mean we, you mean Latinos.
Latinos, yes, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Excellent.
Well,
Excellent.
mostly, as you know, Chicano, Mexican Americans.
Right.
We had a few Puerto Ricans always involved in this, and out there in Arizona, where Angela's from, and I met Angela through these meetings. They have that Julio Camarota, who is actually Puerto Rican, start that program in Phoenix that went all the way to the federal court, and they won the case that it was Arizona couldn't pass a law making it illegal to teach Chicana history. So, I wonder in the context right now with all this stuff around race theory, why we have not made more of that decision, and work and use it to challenge some of these things that are going on in other places in the country now.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We have minimized some of the information that we have, and the country is totally unaware.
Yeah, nobody's aware of that. And why is the media not saying anything about? We have a precedent here that challenges what's going on in Texas, challenges what's going on in these other places, and you don't hear about it.
Well, here we are listening to it in EDUCA K16 Podcast, bringing it out. I mean, I think that, Pedro, you hit on a key point of, people don't talk to each other in education, and it's a matter of elementary all the way through post, university, graduate schools. People don't talk to each other, and so educators. So I think that what you have been doing is a tremendous effort to connect and network and bring that information to others.
Well, locally in New York, I started an organization, Puerto Rican Latino Education Roundtable, where we brought together not only the various groups, the Dominicans and the Puerto Ricans and others, but also the practitioners with the administrators, with the researchers, with the policymakers who don't ever talk to each other, and they work on these problems separately, which is, I think, dysfunctional. Because if you work together and had some sort of strategy, and you were all fitting into a strategy that you're working together, I think we would have much more impact than just individually fighting our battles.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And you hit a key point there, because that's something that we need to revive in a different way once again. Because it's still happening. And when we talk about the media, I'm discovering that the media itself is ignorant of what's going on. So the media has to be educated about what's going on. So part of the reason why they don't cover it is because they don't know about it.
Right.
They're ignorant. And that takes a lot of doing from our part as educators, because we normally talk to each other primarily, but not to anybody else.
Right.
So that's a key point.
That has to
And
be
speaking of which, Pedro, one of the things that I remember was that several years ago you received the Paulo Freire Award at AERA, and that was rather formidable. And so, for those who don't know Paulo Freire, and just in general, how would you respond about Paulo Freire today in the context of today, and what we still need to keep in mind in terms of the whole process of empowerment and education?
Well, I think Freire's approach to education is to deal with it as a political phenomenon. I mean, education through and through, from the financing of it to the curriculum to the pedagogy, the training of it's all politically relevant in terms of the narrative we were talking about that impacts that. And so I think Freire being completely aware that when you're educating, it's a political act. And what you're doing, you're not just developing human beings psychologically, like Sandra said earlier. It's much more than just skills or the psychology of the individual. It's connecting all of that.
Social, emotional.
And education needs to do that, because otherwise we live in these individual silos and suffer all individually, when if we work together, we could do much more to change our conditions. But I think Paulo's was always aware of what he was doing, and what he was trying to do was a political act and had political implications, and was about actually social justice, what we call social justice today. And then he found ways of course, in addition, he developed pedagogical techniques and ways of educating for literacy, basically, as he was mainly in literacy, that we use in our program in New York. I started a program in El Barrio, in the community there. A literacy program. We were working in a school with children, and then we got to meet the parents, and the parents actually came to us, well, what about us? And we discovered that there was a need there, because how could they be good advocates for their children in schools if they themselves don't even read and write, or have very low skills in reading and writing? And so to teach them to read and write, and then in the native language, and then in English, and then teaching them about civics and about how the educational system works, is empowering the community, and it's education, but it's really consciously used. Understanding education is a political phenomenon and has consequences, not only on the individual level, but on the communal level. And,
I love that you mentioned that program that you're talking about, teaching the family, right? It's like, it's not just the young children, but their parents.
The parents, right? Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So often they say, well, the parents, the criticism I hear often, criticism of parents. Well, if the parents don't have that experience and that knowledge, how can they be adequate advocates if they're lacking information and knowledge and experience themselves, and skills even? So they have to say, mothers would say, how can I help them with their homework if I myself can't? And it's true. So with Freire's, to talk back to you, Abdin, Freire's ideas was very influential, and the way we approached the research we were doing in Abati around the schools and the community, and when you have that approach, you can't leave out the family. I mean, you can't leave out the parents. You have to attend to that. And the only part we didn't do is we didn't really work on the political side of that, how that school system actually works and runs. That's a bigger issue that goes beyond just the neighborhood school. And
but one of the things that the audience should be aware of is that what began there at CUNY eventually, over time, spread across the country in many ways. And so you started, in a sense, a series of movements, like mini movements, whether it was Parent Education One, whether it's having centers of research through the university network system, whether it was working with barrio schools, and so forth. All of that over time became very, very prolific in our various communities. And so you were a very important source of information, dissemination, and later utilization in the field. And that was very, very critical.
Oh, oh, thank you.
Yeah, what an honor to have you with us. And and Pedro, so like in this past year, COVID has, well, past 2 years almost, right? COVID
Yeah, right.
presented a new opportunity for us to rethink education. We had an abrupt shift to remote environment all over the nation, all over the world, really, right? So, um, are you hopeful in looking at education today? Are there other aspects or areas about which the listeners should be paying attention to, including the fact that, we've had this abrupt shift to remote learning, and with that, there's a lot of positives, but also a lot of negatives, right? How do you see this aspect right now?
I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of questions about it and a lot of
You do?
uncertainty because I'm not as connected to all of this as schools as at being retired as I was once when I was actively doing research, etc. But I think that that the museo at el Museo del Barrio there's a lot of programs that we have in the community, educational programs, and because of COVID, they had to go online. A lot of that I learned. But lo and behold, we're finding a lot of stuff about being online that's actually positive. Get more
Yes.
people to you get more people. You can reach more people, and more people are responding. And there's a lot that you could do with that. And one of the things I'm hoping that can happen is that we now have a new executive director at the Centro, uh, and Yarimat Bonilla, and she has a vision of the Centro that correlates with the original mission and vision of it. And at the Museo del Barrio, there's a new director who's been there going on 3 years now, who also shares the initial vision and mission of El Museo del Barrio. Both institutions, by the way, starting around the same time in the community back in the civil rights movement. And there's a possibility maybe of working together. And one of them I was hoping is that the center could do some research documenting exactly the successes they're having using online art and education to educate the community and learn from that. And they're working with teachers, they're working with the schools, and everybody's learning from this process. So
Yes,
that's a
we
very
need that
positive.
research. We
Yeah,
need
we
the
need
research.
exactly. And this is my argument is that the museo can't do that, but the centro can, and the centro can do it in collaboration with the museo, and I think make a stronger even argument about the need to have art in the schools as a pedagogical tool and as something that functions to deal holistically with the student. What you were saying before, the social emotional, just and identity as well as with the academic skills. And I did research for many years at a high school in Brooklyn, at Puentes High School, and they've across arts across the curriculum, and they've had tremendous success. Over 90% graduation rates, over 80% going to college.
Wow.
And how come our school system doesn't change to become like them? That's
That's why we
ahí,
exist at EDUCA
ahí está la
K16.
clave. Ahí está la clave, you know. But because
You're
they
asking the same question.
So
It's
So,
like, how do,
I think
how do
it's
we create
important
it?
if the Centro and the Museo come together because that could help push arts education and art as a pedagogical tool as well as a content. And that I think that is something that I like to see happen in more and more of in the future.
and we
It's
need
like,
that data
how do
from that research, that online
yeah,
research. Please work
Yes,
on that.
yeah,
Yes.
yes, I
and,
agree.
and how to create a positive contagion effect so that we begin to impact each other positively
Right.
in that regard,
Yes.
and start a momentum basically
Hmm.
along those lines.
Yeah, I
Yes.
agree. It has to be. There has to be a push that you know. the first thing to cut in budget cuts is not the art programs. That's the
And that's
last
the
thing.
first to go, right?
That's the first to go, yeah, and that's the last that should go.
Arts and physical education.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, Pedro, if you had a few words of wisdom to leave our listeners with that they should be paying attention for the improvement of our schools and education in general in this country, what are those words?
I would say keep on doing the good work, and I think that we all need to contribute from whatever place we are and whatever angle we enter the problematic, so to speak. But to continue doing that, but being much more aware of how that's connected to what other people are doing, and trying to make it so that we're working together and develop those connections and those organizations, because it's only by doing that that we're going to have the larger impact and in terms of changing the systems that are not working for us right now.
Intentional design to have a larger impact. I love it. Dr. Abdin Noor, please center us in this conversation and bring us back with your views on it all.
Well, in a nutshell, and I think Pedro covered a lot of territory. What I'm hearing is that we need to spread the word. We need to create accountability to each other. We need to basically push each other to get to higher levels. Why it is that a school can do very well in the barrio and no one know about it outside the barrio is still astonishing to me. So we need a lot of work in terms of how we communicate this information and how we then push others to continue to do better over time. We need to teach one another. And that's what this has been all about in terms of what was started half a century ago in a little school called Hunter College, and how it has spread throughout the country and is still impacting today. We need much more situations like that that impact the entire country in many multiple ways.
Thank you so much, Dr. Novoa, for that synopsis of our conversation and also pushing
Thank
us
Pedro.
to go further, right? Further ahead. Thank you to our distinguished guest, Pedro Pedraza. We are EDUCA K16 Podcast and YouTube channel. Stay tuned for next week. And as we continue to bring you special guests and elevate the conversation about education in America. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.